Thank you. Thank you so much for that incredibly gracious introduction, and congratulations to all of you on another wonderful event. I've been looking forward to this to see my friend Joe Kraft. Joe and his wife Kelly have been so generous with us at the American Enterprise Institute, and many of you follow our work as well. I also have been looking forward to coming to Kentucky because finally I get to wear this suit. I don't have a red one, but the idea that I could show those of you at least who are University of Kentucky partisans a little bit of spirit gave me great joy. Wonderful to be here in Kentucky. Thank you for welcoming me. You heard from the introduction that I'm the president of a think tank in Washington, D.C. A think tank is an organization that tries to do work on the biggest problems in our society, on politics and on public policy. And one of the things that I've learned over the past 10 years running a think tank in Washington is if you have a big problem and you don't know the solution, the answer is not to think harder in the old way. Most of you know that. I mean, you're successful people. You're literally some of the most successful people in the state. You know perfectly that when you have an intractable problem, you have to think about it in a new way. You have epiphanies in business and in politics and in your personal life, too. I mean, I think about this a lot. I'll give you an example. I have, you've heard in just a moment ago that I've been married for a long time, almost 30 years, and I have 3 kids. 2 of them are teenagers. Pray for me. And my older teenage son, he's my middle child, he graduated from high school recently, but when he was still in high school, it was about a year and a half ago, we were having a parent-teacher conference that was going very poorly. Some of you can relate to this. And it was a grades problem. His instructors were telling us that he was not living up to his potential in his grades. And it was kind of tense. It was actually scary for us at the time. Is he going to graduate from high school? What does this mean? And we got in the car, my wife Esther and I, and we were driving home, and we were silent. I was driving. And she finally said, she's an optimist, and she said, you know, I think that we're thinking about this problem in the wrong way. We have to think about it differently. And I said, well, I'm all ears, sweetheart. She said, at least we know he's not cheating. So tonight, I want to think differently about some of the biggest problems in America. I want to first talk about what I think, and I'm going to submit to you, is the biggest problem that we have in public policy. And then I'm going to turn to politics and talk about the biggest problem that we have in politics. And just like what I was talking about, I'm going to ask you to join me in thinking about these problems in a new way. And I bet if we think in this new way, we can actually come to some solutions, and the solutions can start here tonight. So let's start with policy. I believe that the biggest problem in policy that we face in America today is how we treat the people at the margins of our society. The poor, the people who are cast out, the outsiders. How we treat them is a major problem. And again, it doesn't matter if you're a conservative or liberal or a Democrat or Republican. Nobody likes the despair that we see in our society today. We all know something has to be done, and what we've been doing hasn't been working. Because there are too many people that don't see the American free enterprise system as the source of opportunity that you and I see it as. That, by the way, is an existential threat to capitalism. We have to solve that for our own preservation, as well as because our brothers and sisters are still in need. So I was reflecting on this, looking for the new way of thinking, looking for the epiphany about a year ago. And I was listening at the time to a series of lectures by one of my intellectual heroes. This is somebody who, as a Catholic, is somebody who's led me a lot, but he's more than just a Catholic. He was one of the great intellectuals in America before he tragically passed away 3 years ago. His name was Francis George, and he was the Roman Catholic Cardinal of Chicago, the Archbishop of Chicago. Okay, so I'm listening to a lecture that he was giving about the necessity of helping the poor. He was talking to his wealthiest donors on the North Shore of Chicago, billionaires. And he was talking to them about why they should support poverty programs on the south side of Chicago. And here's what he said, I quote, he said, "The poor need you to pull them out of poverty. And you need the poor to keep you out of hell." I thought that was a pretty gutsy move with his billionaire donors, by the way. And I have chosen not to use that in my own fundraising. But it got me thinking. A couple hours later, I was thinking about that, and it made me ask this question. Do we actually need the poor personally in our lives? You know, I know in a theological and philosophical sense, yes. The answer is, of course, yes. Morally, yeah. But ask yourself this. This is a city that we're in right now, and certainly the city where I live, Washington, D.C., are cities of enormous economic contrasts. Rich people, poor people. How long would it take you really to absorb the fact if all of the poor people in this city suddenly disappeared? How long would it take you to know? How long would it take to enter into your social circles, into your emotional life? I dare say too long, because our lives are not interlinked the way that they have been in past times in this great country. We're separated. We're coming apart. That's ahistoric. Why? Because this is a country that was literally built by the poor. If I look around this room, I see 700 different stories. Some of your ancestors came from Scotland in 1860, and some of them were scratching out potatoes in Ireland 3 generations ago, and some were running from a pogrom, and some of your ancestors were brought to this country involuntarily. But let me tell you one thing that every single one of us has in common. We descend from ambitious riffraff, and we're proud of it. It's the only country in the world where you're proud of the fact that your grandparents were poor. You hide that in other places in the world. You celebrate that here. Why? Because we believe in earning our success. We believe that's the essence of the spirit of this room, of the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, of your careers. It's personal responsibility and striving and not having anything given to you, of earning it on the basis of your own merit. God bless this country for that. I'm so proud to be an American and to be with you for that reason. But something's happened in maybe my lifetime where we've stopped actually needing the poor to build our country, needing people at the bottom to rise to the middle. What happened? Well, let me give you a hypothesis of what happened. That starts on April 24th, 1964, just a couple of weeks before I was born. On April 24th, 1964, President Lyndon Johnson made a fateful move. Now, we often talk about modern presidents as the masters of public communications. That President Obama was great with the press, and President Trump is an unbelievable entertainer, and all the things that we say about modern presidents, right? The real master of the press was Lyndon Johnson. And on April 24th, 1964, he demonstrated that. Why? Because he took a bunch of reporters from Time magazine and a bunch of photographers from Life magazine, and he went to Martin County, Kentucky. He went to Inez, Kentucky. And that's where he kicked off his war on poverty. He took all these reporters down there, and he picked out a guy's house. I'm sure it was picked out in advance, but it looked spontaneous. It was a guy named Tom Fletcher. And he walked up on Tom Fletcher's porch. There's a famous picture. You can still Google it and find it. And, you know, LBJ was this enormous guy, and Tom Fletcher was this little wiry guy. So LBJ gets down on his haunches, and he says, "Tell me your story, Mr. Fletcher." Tom Fletcher was a 38-year-old illiterate father of 8 with a first-grade education who had almost not worked in the past decade. His father had rarely worked. He was poor, and his children were poor, and he had really no future. And that's what he told the President of the United States. That's what the President was waiting for. Because Inez, Kentucky was one of the poorest places in the country. LBJ walked down off that porch and he said to all the reporters present, "Today I declare a war on poverty. Our goal is total victory." And I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, you'd get up on your chair and cheer to hear him say that today. He came to Washington, D.C., and he put a general in charge of that war on poverty. That general's name was Sergeant Shriver, JFK's brother-in-law. As weird Washington serendipity has it, Sergeant Shriver's son is my next-door neighbor in Bethesda, Maryland today, and I know a thing or two about him. When he was put in charge of the war on poverty, he was asked, "What's your goal?" And he said, "Dignity, not doles." Nobody in this room who doesn't agree with that. There's nobody in this room. There's nobody in America who says, actually, dignity's kind of overrated. I'll take doles. Dignity. It's about human dignity. So here's the problem. You know what the basis of human dignity is? Being needed is the basis of human dignity. Being needed by your family, being needed in your community, being needed by the American economy is the basis of human dignity. That's the reason that we've failed. Not because we've made poverty more bearable, but because we haven't made it more escapable. Because we have gone from needing people at the margins of our society to simply helping people at the margins of our society. That's what we have to get past, my friends. By the way, what is the downstream effect of this lack of dignity when people aren't needed? There's a famous paper that was published last year in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It's a fancy science journal by two economists at Princeton University. And this paper asked a very simple question. How have lifespans changed in the last 100 years? Now, mostly the news is good. Every demographic group, young people, old people, men, women, people of all different races, are living longer with better health and higher quality of life. Here's the bad news, except for one group. From 1999 to the present, one group has started to die younger. It's white men, 45 to 54, without a college education. And why are they dying younger? 3 reasons. A 46% increase in cirrhosis of the liver, a 78% increase in suicide, and a 323% increase in drug overdose deaths. My friends, these are men my age who are drinking themselves to death, killing themselves, and taking drugs. Those, my friends, are deaths of despair. Despair is the opposite of dignity. The solution to more dignity is not more help, it's needing people more. Now, lest you think we're talking about some other, this is us. Why are you looking forward to getting home? I mean, this is a great conference. I hope you love every minute of this summit. But the reason you're looking forward to getting home is because somebody needs you there. Like I said, I have teenagers. They don't like me, but they need me. That's the basis of my dignity. It's funny how when you start thinking about something, all the ideas you start hearing in every place. When I started thinking about this after I heard Cardinal George say this, and it stimulated my imagination, soon after that, I was visiting a homeless shelter in New York City. See, in my work, I'm doing a lot in public policy where I have theories and ideas and data, but it's really important to go to the places where you're talking about these people. You have to touch and see and meet the people that you're trying to work with. And so I was at this homeless shelter in New York City that has a very good track record in keeping people off the street, putting them to work, and reuniting them with their families. It's all about men, okay? Men who have been incarcerated and drug and alcohol using and mentally ill, and these are the people that we tend to throw away. How do they do their work? Why are they so successful? This particular organization, because they base everything on work. So I meet a guy on this particular trip. He had just gotten out of prison, after 22 years. It's a typical story that you hear in America today too often. At 18, he was involved in a robbery. He had been taking drugs. accidentally, a clerk in a convenience store was shot. He was blamed. He went to prison for life. By the grace of God and the penal system of the state of New York, he got out at age 40 after 22 years to start his life for really the first time. He went to work sweeping the streets in New York. After 3 months, he got his first real job, which was a minimum wage job at an exterminator agency, killing bugs in Manhattan. Something that fancy people might call a dead-end job, but it's not, by the way. How many of you started your lives with a so-called dead-end job? Yeah, it's a lot of you. Not such a dead end. So his name is Richard Norrat. Richard Norrat, the exterminator. I met him 6 months after he started working at the exterminator agency. And I asked him all that came to my mind, which was, how's your life going? And he took out his iPhone. I thought he was going to tell me that the iPhone was a symbol of his happiness, which would have been wrong. But it wasn't. He showed me an email from his boss, the manager of the exterminator agency. And here's what it said. I remember it distinctly. Dear Richard, I have an emergency bedbug job on East 65th Street. I need you now. I said, so? He said, read it again. My boss said, I need you now. That is the first time in my life anybody has said those words to me. If we build a country where whole groups of people are not needed, we have built-in poverty. Real poverty, where people don't have hopes and people don't have dreams. If we want to solve that, here's the policy idea. Here's the insight. If a policy makes people less needed, it's a bad policy. If a policy makes people more needed through the unification with their families and membership in their communities, and most importantly, real work, it's a good policy. And that should be our goal. That's insight number one. Number two, let's be more controversial. Let's talk about politics. There's a lot of different ideas in this room. There's a lot of different ideas in America today, which is great. Because if there's one thing that we all agree on here, is that competition is good. Competition brings excellence. That's why capitalism makes us wealthy and successful, and why democracy lifts us up in politics. That's competition. And we need a competition of ideas where we disagree with each other. Disagreement's great. But it's not taken a healthy turn in this country. I remember with my daughter, we were watching one of the presidential debates in the run-up to the 2016 election. I remember saying, honey, remember that these people are not displaying our values. These are presidential candidates. You listen to the way that people talk to each other in politics today, and it's scandalous. It's embarrassing. It doesn't matter what your politics are. I have political views, and so do you. But it's not right, and you know it. We all know it. So what do we do? What can we do about that? Now, to begin with, politics that's nasty and hateful and disdainful and insulting, it's not very practical. Politics is supposed to be the art of persuasion. And I don't have to tell you, nobody in history has been persuaded by insults. You can't insult anybody into agreement. It's bad politics. Second point, however, is that we have a moral problem on our hands. I had this insight in 2014 or 2015. I was traveling around. I always do. I give about 150, 175 speeches a year. So it's a lot of what I do for a living. And sometimes I speak to really progressive crowds on college campuses, and sometimes I speak to really conservative activist crowds, and a lot of times it's mixed groups of people, like you. But this one instance in 2014 or 15, I was talking in New Hampshire to a group of 600 conservative activists. I mean, they were really, really fired up. A Tea Party activist group. And I made this point. I mean, it was actually the docket on the speakers was all presidential candidates and me. And I was thinking about it because, the presidential candidates, they're trying to get votes. They're throwing stakes into the audience, basically. So I'm thinking about it. I'm backstage. I got nothing to lose. I'm not running for any office. So I thought to myself, What can I do that will improve the situation? Thought about it a little bit. And I went out and I was doing my talk, and I said, I want to think for a second about all the people who aren't here because they don't agree with you and me politically. I said they're political liberals. And I want you to remember that they're not stupid and they're not evil. And a lady put up her hand, and she was making a joke. She said, I think they're stupid and evil. and I didn't take offense because I knew she was joking, but here's what I did think. I'm a political conservative, but I grew up in a politically liberal home in Seattle, Washington, which is redundant. And when that lady said that, you know what went through my head? She's talking about my brother. And I took it personally a little bit. And here's the insight. Do you want to make things better in America today? You don't need to agree with somebody if you don't agree. You need to hold your views well and dear. But when somebody on your own side, whether it's on social media or in person or, God forbid, around the Thanksgiving table, says that the other side is stupid and evil, they're talking about your sister-in-law. They're talking about your mom. They're talking about somebody that you love. How many of you here tonight love somebody with whom you disagree politically? I'm going to round that off to 100%. Take it personally. When somebody you agree with insults the other side, that's the beginning of bringing the country back together, is standing up for the people that you disagree with. Now, you got to ask, what's at the root of the problem? And, you know, a lot of people say that the problem is in America today, there's too much anger in our politics. Everybody's angry all the time. That's true as far as it goes, but that's not the real emotion. Psychologists will tell us that the problem in American politics today isn't anger, it's contempt. Contempt is the conviction of the utter worthlessness of another human being. And that's the rhetoric that we see in politics today. See, there's nothing really wrong with anger. I saw a very interesting study recently that shows that anger and divorce are not correlated, uncorrelated. I'm married to a Spaniard. Thank God they're uncorrelated. What's correlated with divorce is contempt. There's a guy who teaches at the University of Washington in Seattle. He's a psychologist, a distinguished psychologist by the name of John Gottman, somebody who's a real hero of mine. Why? Because his area of specialization is marital reconciliation. He has brought thousands of couples that were going to divorce back together again. Why is he my hero? Because the basis of any good society is the family. And the basis of stable families is marriage. And you want to make a better society? Bring couples together and keep them in love. People are happier, children are more prosperous, life is better. So this guy does that. It's not just talking, it's not just blah, blah, blah. This guy does it. He's got a laboratory. So I've talked to him, I've interviewed him for my show, a show that I do, a podcast that I do. And when I'm interviewing him, he talks about what he's looking for when couples are on the rocks. And he has this trick where he can get a couple together that are quarreling, and he'll get them to talk about what's bothering them, and then he'll watch the video of their discussion with the sound turned to 0, and he can tell within 5 seconds if they will be divorced with 94% accuracy within 3 years. So you want to know what he's looking for, right? Most of you are married. John Gottman is his name. What is John Gottman looking for? Eye rolling, sarcasm, mockery, contempt, the signs of contempt. Now, again, if you have teenage kids, you see tons of eye rolling. They fall backwards in their chairs. They're rolling their eyes so hard, right? But when it's your spouse, when it's your coworker, when it's somebody who is your peer and who owes you respect, maybe just your fellow citizen, you never quite forget it. You can put up with an argument. A disagreement is just fine and dandy. You're Americans after all. But when you're treated with contempt, you never forget. That is the way to make a permanent enemy. Now, you're successful in business, and so you know perfectly it's bad to make enemies and good to make friends. The problem is that we express contempt in American politics because it's become a habit. It's the mode of political communication, and we do it without even knowing it. Study after study shows that people express contempt for each other, and they are unaware of that fact because that has become the national habit. So, if we want to bring America together again, we need to break the addiction to contempt, the eye-rolling, the sarcasm, the mockery, the disdain, the dismissal of other people's points of view. So how do you do that? How do we break that? I wrestled with this because I actually saw a video of myself on television rolling my eyes at an idea that I didn't agree with. There was another guest on the program. I dismissed this person with contempt. I said, this has got to stop. I have to stop. I'm in a habit. How do I stop a habit? Well, if you ask any brain scientist or psychologist who does work on addiction, they'll tell you the same thing. You want to stop an addiction? Substitute something else for it. You can't just say, stop smoking. You have to do something instead of smoking. You heard a minute ago in the introduction that I was a musician for a long time. Most musicians smoke. So did I. But I always hated it. I was dependent. It made me feel weak. It smells bad. It made my mother sad. So I decided to quit. But the way to quit is you have to put something else in instead of smoking. So I started drinking. If we have a contempt addiction, we need to do something instead of treating each other with contempt. We need to catch ourselves and see it as an opportunity to act differently. So, contemplating the answer to this question. And at the time, when I was working on this, not that long ago, I was shooting a documentary film, and I was in the Himalayan foothills, of all places. I was working with a religious leader called the Dalai Lama. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Dalai Lama is the leader of world Buddhism. He's like the Buddhist Pope. And the Dalai Lama is a wonderful, sweet man that I've gotten to know over the past 10 years. A very close friendship has developed, as a matter of fact. So I was shooting this film with him, but he's also the wisest person I've ever met. He gives me personal advice. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm a Christian. But I'll take advice from a Buddhist. And I was talking to him that day, and I asked him, I said, Your Holiness, what should I do when I feel contempt? And he said, very Buddhist, practice warm-heartedness. And I thought, you got anything else? But then I thought a little bit deeper about it. For those of you who don't know, let me tell you a little story about the Dalai Lama, the leader of Tibetan Buddhism. He is from Tibet, now part of China. He's the leader of the Tibetan people and was exiled as their leader as a teenager. He, at the end of naked communist Chinese aggression, was expelled from Tibet, the leader of 6 million poor pacifist people, and driven into exile. He went into northern India where he led the exiled community of Tibetans to be gone and forgotten, and over the next 60 years became the single most respected religious figure in the world. How? I asked him how. He said, simple. I start every day by praying for the Chinese leaders. Not that they'll give me my homeland back, but rather that they will lead happy lives with their families. That, my friends, is not weak. That's not contempt. It's warm-heartedness that he suggested to me, but it's pure, raw strength. Here's the point. Are you strong enough when you're treated with contempt to answer with kindness, to answer with brotherhood and love? Because that's what strong people actually can do. So I asked him, Your Holiness, how do I do that? Because I don't feel it in my heart. How do I express warm-heartedness when somebody treats me with contempt? He said this, remember a time when you accidentally did that, and remember that feeling. So I went back to my little room at his monastery where I stay, and I thought about it and I prayed about it. And I remembered a time when somebody treated me with contempt, and this is what I always think of today, and I want to share it with you. In 2006, I was a professor at Syracuse University, and my life was very happy. I was beavering away in professorial obscurity. I was teaching my students, and I was writing my articles and books, and nobody ever read my books because they were very boring. And then something happened in my life. I wrote a book that was also very boring, but it hit the news cycle in just the right way, and my book started selling hundreds of copies a day, and my life changed almost overnight. I started appearing on radio and on television, and I started hearing from reporters and politicians. And I started getting emails from total strangers, because it turns out that when you have a book that's a bestseller, people, they don't know you at all, but they'll write to you and tell you about their lives. And if they don't like it, they don't like you, and they tell you that too. So about 2 weeks after the book came out, I remember this distinctly. I got an email from a complete stranger, a guy in Texas, and I was still reading my email faithfully. And the guy in Texas, he starts off his email like this. Dear Professor Brooks, you are a right-wing fraud. That's a pretty unpromising way to start a note to a stranger. But I kept reading. And here's the thing that I noticed. This email was 5,000 words long. It was going to take me 20 minutes to read. But I'm game. I'm reading through it. Second thing I noticed is that this guy read every word of my book and was criticizing every point that I made. I mean, in vitriolic detail. Things like, you know, the columns in table 3.1 of your book are reversed, you moron. Stuff like that. And I'm going through it, and I'm kind of defensive, and my heart is beating kind of fast. But I got to tell you, you know what the real emotion I was feeling was? He read my book. And I became conscious for some reason of that. And so I said, you know, I got nothing to lose. I'm going to tell this guy what's written on my heart right now. So I wrote back to him, dear so-and-so, I know you hate the book. You made that clear. But I got to tell you, it took me 2 years to write that book. And I put my whole heart into it. And you read every word. I'm so grateful to you for that. Thank you. Send. And then I go back to work. Didn't think about it anymore. 15 minutes later, a response from him pops back up. And I'm kind of nervous. I see it's from him, and I open it up. You know what it says? Dear Professor Brooks, next time you're in Dallas, if you want to get some dinner, give me a call. He's like my buddy now. He also said, I didn't think you were going to read this. So why'd you write it? Huh. No, I didn't go out to dinner with him because I didn't want to be like wind up handcuffed to a pipe in his basement or something. I don't know, but but it reminded me of something that Abraham Lincoln said. I defeat my enemies when I make them my friends because they're no longer my enemies. And all it took was a word of warm-heartedness. The response to his contempt was one of gratitude, and it was completely accidental on my part. I remember that, and it inspires me because I remember the feeling that I had. I changed him a little bit, but I changed my heart. And that, my friends, is the secret. You're going to be treated with contempt if you say anything political publicly immediately, just the way it is. Some of you are active on social media. Say something political on social media. Doesn't matter if it's innocuous, doesn't matter if it's nice. You don't have to be mean at all. Somebody, some stranger will treat you with contempt. That's your opportunity. That's your opportunity to pivot to kindness, to warm-heartedness, as an act of will to make the world a little bit better. Now, in my own case, I treated him with gratitude, and gratitude has this particular alchemy in changing a relationship. There's a great book that some of you have read, maybe forgotten. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It sounds like a manual for bending people to your will, but it isn't. It's actually a manual for ethical, positive living. It's a beautiful book. Read it again. And there's one section where Dale Carnegie, he's interviewing the most famous, successful people in America to get their secrets of success. It's written in the 30s. And at this particular juncture, he's on Broadway interviewing the world's most famous magician at the time named Howard Thurston. This guy had been doing the same tricks on Broadway for 40 years, a variety show. And people would come in from the Midwest and they would go to Broadway and they would see the famous Howard Thurston. It was rabbits out of hats and card tricks. And Dale Carnegie wanted to know why he was so phenomenally successful. So he went to see him. He said that tricks were completely conventional, but he said that Howard Thurston loved his audience. He would laugh along with them and be amazed by his own tricks. And turns out that was the magic. That was the true magic. So he went back to his dressing room afterwards and said, Mr. Thurston, that was amazing. I finally understand why you're so famous, why you're so rich. You love them. How do you do it night after 40 years? You're doing 10 shows a week. How do you do it? And he says, Howard Thurston says, it's easy. Every night before I go out, I say to myself, I am truly grateful for the people in those seats who make it possible for me to make my living doing something I love. And just as he saw the footlights going up on the audience, going out onto the stage, he said to himself every night, I love my audience. I love my audience. How often do you do that? How often do you remind yourself? I mean, you have these exalted positions of leadership. You're the leaders of this state. You're the stewards of the economic prosperity and the opportunity in people's lives. Are you frequently enough reminding yourself that you love the people that you serve? Do you remind yourself that you're grateful for the people that you're able to serve? It's in your hands to do that as an act of will. And in so doing, you have the secret to the warm-heartedness that you need as a leader, so that when contempt inevitably comes your way, you can pivot to the warm-heartedness that this country needs. Now, this is the message that I'm giving to members of Congress. This very talk I gave to the Congressional Republican Retreat. And I reminded them that it is in all of our hands, and not just politicians' hands, business leaders' hands, family, community leaders' hands, to change the conversation in this country, because this is a country of citizens, not of leaders. We elect people who reflect what we want. If we want a better country that's based on solidarity, based on love, we have to be the ones who change the conversation. So here's my last thought for you. The new way of thinking about others is to make them needed. And the new way to think about politics is to use the climate of contempt to bring out the best that's in our hearts. If we can do this, here's what we can do. There's a thing that I've noticed when I'm in the South, here, and farther south still. When I go into Southern Baptist churches, it's this thing that I love. I often see this sign over the door. I'm a Catholic, so we don't do this, right? But it's really striking that the sign over the door. But not when you're coming in. It's when you're going out. So it's for congregants, and they're going out to the parking lot. You know what it says? You're now entering mission territory. I love that. Why? Because that sign should be over these doors, my friends. As leaders, we can change the country. It starts with us. It starts with our hearts. It starts with our love for each other and the love for people who don't even agree with us. So the last thing I'd like to leave you with is imagine that sign is over these doors and over all the doors that you go through. You're now entering mission territory. God bless you, and God bless America.